My name is Margaret, and I was born and raised in a small Kentucky town where everyone knows each other's names, and most folks never lock their doors. Life was simple, sometimes too simple, but it was also hard in its own way. I married young, to a man who worked with his hands and knew how to mend fences, fix barns, and drive a truck through the rough country roads. We had one son, my pride and joy, my heart walking outside my body. His name was Daniel, and from the moment he opened his eyes, I promised myself I would do anything in this world to give him the life I never had. I scrubbed floors, washed laundry for neighbors, and worked as a cleaner in a hotel just to make ends meet. I didn't mind hard work. My hands got rough and cracked, my knees ached, and sometimes my back screamed at me to rest, but every time I saw Daniel's face light up when he had new shoes for school or a warm coat in winter, I knew it was all worth it. He was my reason, my blessing. As Daniel grew, people in our town would often say, "That boy is going places." He was bright, polite, and determined. He studied hard, made good grades, and got himself into college. I cried the day I dropped him off because part of me was afraid I'd lose him to a bigger world, one I didn't belong in. You see, I never went to college, never traveled much, and never knew anything outside the borders of our little town. But Daniel, he was destined for more, and I was proud beyond words. I kept working, cleaning houses, scrubbing floors, dusting furniture, mopping bathrooms, anything that would pay for his books, his rent, and his food. He never asked me for much, but I gave what I had, even when it meant I went without. He didn't know that some nights I ate just cornbread and beans because I had to send the rest of the money to him. He didn't know that I wore the same old dress to church every Sunday because buying myself something new meant he might have to go without a textbook. I never told him because a mother's sacrifice should never be his burden. Years passed, and Daniel grew into a fine young man. He got himself a good job in the city, one that paid well and gave him a chance at the life I dreamed for him. He found himself a girl, too, a pretty one with shiny hair and a smile that could stop traffic. Her name was Charlotte, and though I was happy for him, something inside me felt like I didn't quite fit into their world. She came from a wealthier family, the kind that lived in houses with chandeliers and kitchens bigger than my entire home. When I visited, I could feel the difference. Her mother spoke in a way that made me feel small, always asking where I worked, what I did, and raising her eyebrows when I said I cleaned houses. She tried to be polite, but I could hear the judgment in her voice. Daniel never said anything, but I could tell he noticed the difference too. Then came the day Daniel told me he was getting married. My heart swelled with happiness and pride. My boy was about to start his own family, to build the kind of life I always dreamed for him. But then came the words that cut deeper than any knife I ever knew. He said, "Mama, the wedding is going to be a big one, and Charlotte's family has everything planned. They want you to help out at the wedding. They say it would mean a lot if you could handle some of the serving and cleaning, since you're so good at it." At first, I thought I misunderstood him. Surely my own son wasn't asking me to work at his wedding instead of sitting as his mother, dressed in my best clothes, smiling proudly as he said his vows. But no, I hadn't misheard. They wanted me to be the maid at my son's wedding. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Of course, honey. Anything you need." But when he left, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking, tears spilling onto the wood. How could it be that the same son I had sacrificed everything for, the same boy I had given my whole life to, now wanted me to serve drinks and clean plates while he married his bride? Still, I told myself it was his day, not mine. If this was what it took to see him happy, then I would swallow my pride. I would be invisible if I had to, because his happiness was more important than my hurt. The days after Daniel told me about the wedding were some of the hardest I ever faced. I went through my work as if nothing had happened, scrubbing and sweeping other people's houses, polishing their silverware and folding their laundry. But inside me something was breaking piece by piece. I thought about that little boy I raised, the one who used to run barefoot through the Kentucky fields chasing fireflies at dusk, the boy who used to hug me so tight at night and say, "Mama, you're my best friend." How did we come to this place where I would not sit as his honored mother, but stand as the help in the corner of his life's biggest moment? At first, I thought maybe I should tell him how I felt. But then I remembered the years I spent teaching him to chase his dreams, never to worry about me. I remembered all the nights I prayed for his success, and I realized this was what it meant. He had found love. He had found a place in a world that never wanted me. So I bit my tongue, held my tears in my throat, and nodded whenever he spoke about the wedding plans. Charlotte's family took over every detail. They wanted a big ceremony with a hall decorated in white roses, a string quartet, and a 3-tiered cake. They wanted hundreds of guests, most of them from their side, business people and wealthy friends who wore fancy clothes and drove shiny cars. I had never even been in such company before. When they spoke of these things, I felt like an outsider, a shadow in the corner. But I smiled because it made Daniel happy. Inside my home, though, I cried. I sat on the edge of my bed at night, staring at the walls, asking myself if maybe I had failed as a mother. Maybe I hadn't given him enough pride in who he came from. Maybe I hadn't taught him to see my worth beyond the work I did with my hands. But then I reminded myself that love isn't measured in status or wealth. It's measured in the sacrifices we make. And I had given every drop of love I had. The invitations were sent, the date was set, and as it drew closer, I felt the weight grow heavier. Charlotte's mother called me one afternoon, her voice smooth but sharp, and she said, "We'd appreciate if you could handle the serving and tidying during the reception. You're so good at keeping things neat, and it will make everything run smoothly." Her words were like honey laced with vinegar. I wanted to scream, to tell her I was the groom's mother, not some hired maid. But all I said was, "Yes, ma'am, I'll do what I can." When I hung up the phone, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the receiver. The night before the wedding, I ironed my plain black dress. It wasn't new. It was the same one I wore when I worked at funerals and church dinners, but it was clean. I pressed it until there wasn't a wrinkle in sight. I polished my shoes until I could almost see my face in them. I told myself it didn't matter what I wore, because no one would be looking at me. I braided my hair tight to keep it neat and out of the way. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not a proud mother ready to see her only son wed, but a tired woman preparing to fade into the background of his new life. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, listening to the sound of the crickets outside my window, my heart heavy with both love and sorrow. I prayed to God to give me strength to get through the day without breaking down. I asked him to let me find peace in knowing I had done all I could as a mother. The morning came with the sun spilling golden light over the Kentucky hills. The air smelled of dew and honeysuckle. It should have been a day of joy, and in some ways it was. I put on my dress, tied my shoes, and walked to the bus stop because I didn't own a car. When I arrived at the wedding hall, I was met with a sight that nearly took my breath away. The place was transformed into something out of a fairy tale. White roses lined the aisles, candles flickered on every table, and a chandelier sparkled above like captured starlight. Guests in fine clothes laughed and greeted each other as if they belonged to a different world entirely. I stood there for a moment, holding my hands together, reminding myself why I was there. Not as a guest, not as the mother of the groom, but as the maid. One of the caterers handed me a tray and pointed me toward the guests. "Take these around," he said, without even asking who I was. And so I did. I walked through the crowd, offering glasses of champagne, listening to their laughter as they barely noticed me. My heart pounded when I saw Daniel standing tall and handsome in his suit. For a moment, pride swelled inside me again, and I almost forgot the pain. But then he turned, and his eyes swept past me like I was no one at all. He didn't see the woman who gave him everything. He saw only another server. I lowered my head and carried on. The music started playing, soft and sweet, the kind that floats through the air like a dream. Guests took their seats, women in gowns that shimmered under the chandelier, men in black suits with polished shoes that clicked against the floor. I stayed near the side, tray in my hands, pretending not to exist. My eyes followed Daniel as he stood at the altar, his shoulders straight, his face calm but glowing with happiness. He looked so grown, so far from the boy who once held my hand when he was scared of thunderstorms. I wanted to cry, but not from pride this time, from the ache that I wasn't standing where a mother should be, smiling at her son as he began his new life. The bride walked in then, her dress long and white with lace that trailed behind her like a river of snow. Charlotte was beautiful, radiant even, and the crowd gasped as she entered. Everyone stood, turned, clapped softly as if the moment belonged to royalty. I stayed in the corner, my back pressed against the wall, my tray heavy in my hands. I wanted to stand, to clap, to be part of it, but I wasn't welcome there. I was just the maid, just the woman who scrubbed and cleaned, not the woman who carried Daniel in her arms, who stayed up all night when he was sick, who worked herself to the bone so he could wear nice clothes to school. The ceremony was beautiful, I won't lie. The preacher spoke words about love and commitment, about two lives becoming one, about honor and respect. I listened and wondered if those words included me anymore. Did my son still honor the mother who raised him? Did he respect the sacrifices I made? Or was I just a shadow in his new, polished world? When they said their vows, Daniel's voice was strong and steady. "I promise to love you, to cherish you, to put you first." I wanted to believe those promises came from the boy I raised, but they were meant for her, not me. My chest tightened, and I had to look away before the tears spilled. I found myself staring at my hands, rough and cracked from years of scrubbing floors. Those hands told my whole story. They were the reason my son stood there in a fine suit, marrying into wealth. Those hands gave him everything, yet now they held nothing but an empty tray. When the preacher announced them husband and wife, the room filled with applause and cheers. The couple kissed, and everyone rose to celebrate. I stayed seated in the corner, clapping softly to myself, invisible among the crowd. As the guests filed out toward the reception, I followed with my tray, ready to serve them drinks and food as if I weren't dying inside. The reception hall was even more dazzling than the ceremony. Long tables draped in white cloths, crystal glasses shining in neat rows, silver cutlery that looked too fine to touch. Waiters moved swiftly, carrying trays, pouring wine, clearing plates. I joined them, blending into the crowd of staff. I carried hors d'oeuvres from table to table, offering them with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Some guests took them without even looking at me, their conversations too important to notice the help. A few gave me polite nods, but no one saw me for who I was. I caught sight of Daniel and Charlotte laughing together as they posed for photographs. Her mother stood proudly beside them, her dress glittering under the lights, her hand resting gently on her daughter's arm as if she owned the day. And maybe she did, I wondered if anyone in that room even knew who I was. Did they know the groom's mother was serving them shrimp on a silver tray? Did they know the reason he stood tall and educated was because I had bent my back over endless floors to send him through school? Or was I just another nameless worker to them? At one point, Daniel's eyes met mine, just for a second, across the crowded room. My heart leapt, thinking maybe he would come to me. Maybe he would take my hand. Maybe he would tell me he hadn't forgotten. But then he looked away, smiling at a guest who congratulated him. My heart sank lower than I thought it could. I excused myself and stepped into the kitchen, setting down the tray before my knees gave out. I leaned against the counter, breathing hard, tears threatening to break through. Another server glanced at me but said nothing. Maybe he thought I was just tired. I wanted to scream, to run, to leave that place and never come back. But I couldn't. This was Daniel's wedding. No matter how much it hurt, I wasn't going to abandon him on his special day. So I wiped my eyes, straightened my dress, picked up the tray, and went back out. As the night went on, the music grew louder, the laughter brighter, the dancing wilder. I watched from the sidelines, carrying drinks, clearing plates, sweeping up crumbs, while my son danced with his bride. They looked so happy, so far away from me. I told myself this was enough. His happiness was what mattered. Even if I wasn't part of it, even if I was just a shadow, at least he was smiling. And yet, in the quiet corners of my heart, I wondered if he even knew the price of that smile. The music played louder as the night stretched on, violins mixing with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Guests danced under the chandelier, skirts twirling, shoes tapping, while the smell of roasted meat and sweet cake filled the air. I moved quietly between the tables, my tray balanced on my hands, careful not to let the glasses rattle. I had done this kind of work for years, but never in such a place, never with such fine company, and certainly never at my own son's wedding. Every step I took felt like a knife turning deeper, because I knew where I should have been. I should have been sitting near the front, wearing a dress I had saved for, smiling as people congratulated me for raising a fine son. Instead, I was refilling drinks for strangers who didn't even see me. They looked past me, their eyes always on one another, never on the woman carrying their plates away. At one table, I heard a group of women laughing. "The groom's mother is from a small town, isn't she?" one of them whispered, leaning toward another. "I heard she does cleaning work." They said it softly, but not softly enough. My ears caught every word. Another woman lifted her glass and said, "Well, thank goodness he married up. He'll have a better future now." They all laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. My cheeks burned, but I kept my head low, collecting their empty plates as if I hadn't heard. Inside, though, I felt like my heart was being wrung out. The speeches began then. The bride's father stood proudly, his voice booming across the hall. He spoke of his daughter's beauty, her grace, her upbringing, and then he welcomed Daniel into their family with open arms. People clapped and cheered. Then Charlotte stood up and spoke of her love for Daniel, her joy at becoming his wife, and her excitement for the life they would build together. Everyone raised their glasses, tears in their eyes. Finally, Daniel spoke. He thanked his bride, her family, his friends, and his colleagues. He spoke of the blessings in his life, how grateful he was for this new chapter. My ears strained, my heart praying, waiting for him to mention me, waiting for just one word, one acknowledgement that his mother was in the room, that his mother had made this life possible. But his words never came. He never said my name. He never thanked me. I stood in the corner, my hands trembling on the tray, fighting to keep my knees from buckling. I wanted to collapse right there, to scream and cry and ask him how he could forget me so completely. But instead, I swallowed my pain and carried on. Later, as the guests lined up for the meal, I carried plates from the kitchen to the tables. The smell of roasted chicken and gravy, mashed potatoes with butter, green beans, and cornbread filled the air. I served them quietly, my stomach empty because I had not eaten all day. No one offered me a seat. No one asked if I was hungry. I was just part of the staff. When I passed by Daniel's table, I slowed for a moment, hoping he might look up, meet my eyes, give me even the smallest smile. But he was too busy laughing with Charlotte and her friends. My heart ached so deeply I thought it might burst. The dancing started after the meal. Daniel and Charlotte shared their first dance, twirling across the floor as everyone watched with adoration. Cameras flashed, capturing the perfect moment. I stood by the wall, holding a tray of empty glasses, watching my boy laugh and smile as if the world was his. I remembered when he was just a little boy standing on my feet while we danced in the kitchen, his laughter filling the room. Back then he would say, "Mama, you're the best dancer in the world." Now he danced with his bride while I stood in the shadows. As the evening wore on, I grew tired. My feet ached, my back screamed, my hands trembled from carrying so much. But worse than the physical pain was the silence in my heart. I felt invisible, erased, as if my years of sacrifice had been washed away. Every smile Daniel gave his bride was one I once dreamed he would give me in gratitude. Every cheer from the guests was a cheer I longed to hear for the woman who had raised him alone. At one point, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The night air was cool against my skin, the stars bright above the Kentucky hills. For a moment, I felt free. I could breathe without the sound of laughter cutting through me. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Lord, give me strength. Don't let me break down in there." Tears slid down my cheeks, but I wiped them away quickly. I couldn't let anyone see. I was already the maid at my son's wedding. I couldn't be the fool who cried, too. When I went back inside, the cake was being cut. Everyone gathered around, clapping and cheering as Daniel and Charlotte fed each other pieces. Charlotte laughed as frosting smeared on her lip. Daniel wiped it off gently, and the crowd roared with joy. I stood at the back, unseen, watching as if I were a stranger. I wanted to be happy for him, and part of me was, but the sadness in my chest drowned out the joy. As the night drew late, people grew louder, drinks flowing more freely, laughter echoing through the hall. I worked until my feet could barely carry me, until my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped a tray. When it was finally over, when the guests had left and the hall was quiet, I helped the staff clear the tables, sweep the floors, gather the trash. My son was already gone, off with his bride to begin their new life. He didn't even say goodbye to me. I walked home that night under the dark Kentucky sky, my shoes worn, my dress wrinkled, my heart shattered. I had given everything I had to Daniel, and yet on the most important day of his life, I was nothing more than the maid. The walk home that night felt longer than it ever had before. The roads were quiet, the crickets singing their steady song, the moonlight spilling across the fields like silver paint. I carried nothing in my hands, no flowers, no gifts, no memories worth keeping, only the weight of my broken heart. My shoes scraped against the gravel, and every step echoed the same thought inside me. I was not his mother that day. I was just the maid. When I opened the door to my little house, the silence inside pressed down on me. The kitchen table where I had once helped Daniel with his homework looked emptier than ever. The old rocking chair by the window where I had rocked him to sleep when he was a baby stood still and cold. Every corner of the house held memories of the boy who once clung to me like I was his whole world. And yet, at his wedding, I had been invisible. I sat at the table and laid my hands flat on the wood. They were swollen from carrying trays and scrubbing dishes, red from hot water, rough as sandpaper. I stared at them a long time. These were the same hands that once held Daniel's tiny fingers when he learned to walk, the same hands that wiped his tears when he scraped his knee, the same hands that packed his lunches, washed his clothes, and counted out crumpled dollar bills to buy him what he needed. And yet, to him, they were just the hands of a maid. I let myself cry then, not the quiet tears I had hidden all day, but the deep sobs that came from the core of me. My shoulders shook, my chest heaved, and I pressed my face into my hands and wept for everything I had lost, not just the wedding, but the bond that had once been unbreakable between us. Through the blur of my tears, I thought about Charlotte's family, their wealth, their polished ways, their elegant clothes. I thought about how different they were from me, and I wondered if that was why Daniel had pushed me aside. Maybe he was ashamed of me. Maybe he thought I didn't belong in his new world, and maybe he was right. I wasn't educated like them. I didn't have fine things. I didn't know the right words to say at fancy gatherings. All I knew was hard work and sacrifice. But then another thought came. If it weren't for me, he never would have had the chance to marry into such a world. If it weren't for my years of scrubbing, saving, and sacrificing, he wouldn't have gone to college, wouldn't have met Charlotte, wouldn't have stood in that fine suit at the altar. Every piece of his happiness had been built on the foundation of my labor, and yet he had forgotten. The days after the wedding passed in a blur. I went back to work, cleaning other people's houses as if nothing had happened. But inside, I carried a heaviness that no broom or mop could sweep away. Neighbors asked me about the wedding. How was it? Wasn't it beautiful? They said. I smiled politely and nodded. Yes, it was lovely, I replied. I never told them the truth. I never told them I spent the day carrying trays instead of being honored as the groom's mother. Some pains are too deep to share. Nights were the hardest. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over. The look on Daniel's face as he smiled at Charlotte. The sound of applause when her father gave his speech. The way he glanced past me as if I wasn't even there. I tried to understand him. Maybe he thought he was protecting me from embarrassment. Maybe he thought I wouldn't fit in with the wealthy guests. Or maybe, and this was the thought that cut deepest, maybe he truly didn't see my worth anymore. One evening, I found myself pulling out the old photo album from the shelf. Inside were pictures of Daniel as a baby, wrapped in a soft blanket. Pictures of him with cake smeared across his face on his first birthday. Pictures of him in overalls holding a toy truck. Pictures of him in his cap and gown on the day he graduated, my proudest day. I traced my fingers over those photos, remembering the love we shared, remembering the way he once looked at me as if I was his whole world. I whispered to the pictures, "Where did you go, my boy? Where did we lose each other?" As the weeks turned into months, I heard little from Daniel. He was busy with his new wife, his new life, his new family. I didn't want to intrude, so I stayed quiet. When he did call, his words were polite but distant. He asked if I was doing well, if I needed anything, but never once did he bring up the wedding. I think he knew how badly it hurt me, and maybe that's why he avoided the subject. Or maybe he just didn't think about it at all. I carried on with my life, but a part of me remained broken. I had always believed that a mother's sacrifices would be remembered, that love like mine could never be forgotten. but now I wasn't so sure. Sometimes love gets buried beneath the weight of pride, ambition, and the need to belong somewhere else. Still, despite the pain, I couldn't stop loving him. He was my son, my only child, my greatest gift in this world. Even if he saw me as nothing more than a maid, I would still be his mother, and I would still pray for him every night. Time has a way of softening even the deepest wounds, though it never truly erases them. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself carrying on with my routines as if nothing had changed, though inside me everything had. I worked my job, swept floors, scrubbed windows, and folded laundry. Life in our little Kentucky town didn't pause just because my heart had been broken. People still needed their houses cleaned, their meals cooked, their gardens tended. And I still needed the wages to pay my bills. But even as I worked, there was an ache inside me that wouldn't let go. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the church hall after a community dinner, a woman named Mrs. Turner stopped me. She was older than me, with silver hair tied neatly back and kind eyes that always seemed to see more than they should. "Margaret," she said softly, "I was at Daniel's wedding. I saw you working there." My heart froze. I thought she might pity me or whisper gossip about how I had been treated. I braced myself for embarrassment, but instead, she reached for my hand and squeezed it. "I want you to know, I saw the way you looked at him. I saw the love in your eyes. And I want to tell you, that boy of yours may not understand it now, but one day he will. One day he'll know what it cost you to get him there." Her words hit me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time since that night, I felt seen. Someone had noticed, not the black dress I wore, not the tray in my hands, not the way I tried to fade into the background, but the love that burned inside me, the love of a mother who had given everything. I held her hand tightly, tears filling my eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." That evening, I sat on my porch as the sun set over the hills. The sky turned shades of pink and gold, and the crickets began their chorus. I thought about what Mrs. Turner had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe Daniel didn't see it now. Maybe Charlotte's family never would. But perhaps someday, when life humbled him, he would remember. Perhaps when he faced struggles of his own, he would think back on the mother who never stopped working for him. The mother who carried trays at his wedding just so he could shine without shadows. A small peace settled over me as I rocked in my chair. I realized then that my worth was not tied to whether Daniel thanked me in public or honored me in front of others. My worth came from the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made, and the love that had never wavered. The world may have seen me as the maid, but I knew the truth. I was the foundation of his life. Not long after, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was neat, the handwriting unfamiliar. When I opened it, I found a note from one of the guests at the wedding, a woman I hadn't spoken to that day. She wrote, "I don't know if you remember me, but I was at your son's wedding. I noticed you serving food and drinks, and someone told me you were the groom's mother. I want to say that I admire you deeply. It must have taken great strength to do what you did with such grace. You are a remarkable woman." I held that letter against my chest and wept. It was a small kindness, but to me it was everything. It was proof that I hadn't been completely invisible, that my quiet suffering had not gone unnoticed. Even strangers could see the truth my own son had overlooked. That night, I knelt by my bed and prayed, "Lord, I don't ask for riches. I don't ask for recognition. All I ask is that Daniel will one day see me for who I am, not for what I do. Let him remember the mother who raised him, not the maid at his wedding." Over time, I began to heal. The wound was still there, but it didn't bleed as much. I started to focus on the blessings I did have. The roof over my head, the food on my table, the friends in town who cared for me. I realized that bitterness would only eat away at my soul, and I couldn't let that happen. Still, sometimes at night, when the wind rustled through the trees and the world grew quiet, I would see Daniel's face in my mind. I would remember him as a little boy, running through the fields with a kite in his hands, his laughter echoing in the air. And I would whisper to the darkness, "I love you, son. Even if you never see me, I love you." It wasn't an ending, not yet, but it was a turning point, a place where sorrow began to bend into something softer, a place where I could breathe again, even if the ache never fully left. The years moved forward as they always do. Daniel settled into his new life with Charlotte. They bought a fine house in the city with tall windows and polished floors, and soon enough they had children of their own. My grandchildren. The first time I held the baby, a little girl with bright eyes and soft hair, I felt a flood of love rush through me. For a moment I forgot all the hurt. She wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, and in that small grip I found healing. Life, it seemed, always found a way to continue, no matter how broken the past had been. Still, I never forgot that wedding day. It stayed with me like a scar, no longer an open wound, but a reminder of what had been lost. Sometimes, when Daniel visited with his family, I caught myself looking at him, searching his face for signs that he remembered, that he regretted how he had treated me. But he never said a word. He would kiss my cheek, call me Mama, and then turn to his wife and children as if the story of that night had been erased. Perhaps it had for him, but not for me. I learned, over time, to stop expecting apologies. They may never come. I learned to stop wishing for recognition from the world. It may never see me for who I am. Instead, I found peace in knowing the truth within my own heart, that I had given everything I had, and that was enough. I was his mother, whether he acknowledged it or not. The world may have mistaken me for a maid, but I knew the hands that carried those trays were the same hands that had carried him through life. One evening, years after the wedding, I sat on my porch as the sun dipped low over the Kentucky hills. The crickets chirped their steady song, and the fireflies danced in grass. My rocking chair creaked beneath me as I watched the sky turn from gold to purple. In that quiet moment, I thought about my life, about the hard years, the long days of labor, the countless sacrifices I had made. I thought about the wedding, about the pain that nearly broke me. And then I thought about love. Love, I realized, isn't always returned in the way we hope. Sometimes it goes unnoticed. Sometimes it is forgotten. But love itself is never wasted. Every meal I cooked, every floor I scrubbed, every dollar I sent Daniel's way, those were all acts of love, and they built a life for him that he could not have had otherwise. Even if he never saw it, even if he never spoke of it, the truth was there, living in every step of his journey. And that truth was mine to hold. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night. I was the maid at my own son's wedding. But I was also his mother, and nothing can take that away from me. The breeze carried the words away, but I felt lighter after saying them. For the first time, I truly believed them. I understood then that dignity isn't given by others. It's claimed by the soul. I had spent too long feeling invisible, but in my heart I was never invisible. I was strong. I was faithful. I was a mother who had given her all. Not long after, my granddaughter climbed onto my lap, her little arms around my neck. "Grandma," she said with a smile, "you're the best." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged her close. In her small voice, I heard the acknowledgement I had waited for all my life. Maybe it didn't come from Daniel, but it came from her. and that was enough. So now, when I look back on that day, I don't just see the pain. I see the strength it took to endure it. I see the quiet grace that carried me through. I see the love that no humiliation could erase. And though my story may sound sorrowful, I tell it with peace in my heart. Because in the end, I wasn't just the maid. I was and always will be his mother,